Okay, welcome back everyone. It is 8/21 of 2015. We're going to continue with the Cambridge Companion to Brentano. And we're going to take a look at ontology, but ontology is really situated right on top of epistemology. So if you did cover the previous talk on epistemology, we're going to look at the same framework. We're just going to take a look at different concepts within that same framework. Because for Brentano, he basically aligns his epistemology with his ontology. So we're going to take a look at this. It's fairly brief, but if we look at the active presentation, we're going to look at physical parts and the boundaries of those physical parts in primary presentation. And our task is to ascertain being as true out of accidental being through judgment. And the initial stage is to form those existential acceptances. And as I said, the epistemology of the true and gnosis concerning ontology coincide. To reach actual existence, we must acquire complete substance. Substance is the universal for Brentano, both mental and physical. And the inexistence of object that we've been discussing is acquired as a corresponding immanent object to a physical object. And it is situated within its own temporal boundary. And we find out at this first level that we basically are dealing with the physical, the sensate, and we acquire our existential acceptances of individual inexistence of objects as generalities, as general names. So within the realm of the sensate, we're really just going to acquire generalities. We acquire those generalities intuitively, and after we intuitively acquire them, we simply affirm or deny their existence, a very basic existential judgment of affirmation or denial. So judgment is very primitive here, just simply a basic existential judgment. But we either affirm a general name for a thing. Remember, Brentano's position is reism, so we affirm the general name for a thing, an object in sensate reality, or we deny its existential existence one way or the other. We either affirm or deny existential existence. And from there, we want to take a look at the psychical realm, or the realm of the active relation. And we actually go to Aristotle's Docunta threshold. Now, when we reach the Docunta threshold, we're dealing with logic, but it's obliquo logic. It's logic with that indirect or oblique perspective, that spiritual perspective, which differs from the intuitive recto direct facing perspective. Now we're taking an obliquo slanted spiritual type look at reality. And under the general name, we realize that there are abbreviated the rational, and there is the presence of that mark of the idea, that mark of deeper signification, and every topoid, or every generalization, which Brentano calls a topoid, every topoid does have a deeper significance to it, and that deeper significance can be obtained through an obliquo stance, a spiritual oblique perspective, and then dialogue at the Docunta threshold with others. And we want to lift out and identify that mark of the idea, that mark of deeper signification, so we can raise the topoids to their logical place, their logical role of being a sign. Now, Brentano says that these signs are fictions, but they're fictions because we're positing them as individual positings. You know, I'm positing my signs. At the Docunta threshold, I will engage in dialogue in an attempt to raise that sign to universality, but initially I posit an individual interpretation of the deeper significance of a generality as an individual positing of a sign. So it is a fiction because it is individual at this point, not yet confirmed through recognition and universality. So we're really just articulating accidents of the souls, or the particular ideas or significations for these individual topoids that we acquired through the intuitive recto face-on intuitive apprehension. So ideas or signs are discovered at this Dakunta threshold through dialogue, and it's here at dialogue at the Dakunta threshold where we determine these signs as being either N doxa correct or A doxa incorrect. So through dialogue we make a second existential judgment, but a deeper existential judgment at the level of signification. They're going to either be N doxa correctly identified as a sign, or A doxa incorrectly rejected as not being a certain signification. So at this level of logical parts, we acquire the lifting of the topoid name to signification or to a lexical network of signs. So we've moved on from an intuitive lexical network of topoids to a rationally ascertained, dialogically ascertained lexical network of significations, deeper signs of meaning. So from there we want to move on to the metaphysical parts, and each of our sign ideas possesses accidental properties and subsystems, but the primary sign notion of the true itself is considered that which we want to refine to universal substance. So this notion of the true sign, that sign of deeper significance, is that which we want to refine to deeper and deeper universal substance. Relation is determined through consideration of two signs that are taken up together, and we end up with an interrelated sign model that Brentano says has two reciprocal modalities. How does the sign model function? It functions as an object theory, and it functions as a mediator theory. As an object theory, it functions as an eschatological target for our differentiation into externality. As a mediator theory, it functions as a mediating meaning filter, which will influence our differentiation in externality. So fine line drawn there. You can see why they're reciprocal. They're speaking of basically the same thing, but the sign model is an eschatological positing that influences our action of differentiation. Now our mental act that's always behind our inexistence object is always coupled with that object of inexistence, that object of positing. And in externality there is always a corresponding transcendent object that is present. There is an objective transcendence in reality. And that's key here for the author, because the author is trying to tell us that there is an objective presence of transcendence also. It's not simply our sign model that functions as a teleosis of transcendence. There is a corresponding transcendent object to our in existence posited object of teleosis. But our posited object will always modify the transcendent object, and that might be an intersubjectivity of recognition. That could be the transcendence that is present in externality. It could be that basic ethics of recognition that we hear of often. That could be the transcendence, which would be an intersubjective interpretation of a teleosis at a corporate level. So from here, we realize that we do have a in existence posited object that will modify and qualify a transcendent corresponding object in externality, and therefore the posited model, the posited sign model, does have ontological significance. And so we take a look at 3b. The concept of being is critiqued through a sevenfold consideration of the object of inexistence. We consider the immanent object itself, its temporal modification, or its eschatological trajectory within temporal continuum, if it is part of an aggregate whole of a unity, its individual properties, its interrelatedness, and its boundary and its own subsystems, and any propositional content that it might hold. that each sign might hold within the model. And in that way, we get kind of that overarching sui generis universality mark of a sign genus that encloses all the individual signs, and it helps us to identify that universality, and it helps us to identify the mark of ontological significance that the model itself holds, and that each individual sign also holds. They hold an ontological significance that can actually lift the sign to Noema, a Noema of structured thought, structured ontological thought. So it can move from signification to Noema ontological signification if it passes through this 7-point critique, according to the author. But we can see that basically we do proceed from the generality of a topoid name, which basically takes thing and identifies thing as a topoid, but then topoid is lifted to a sign of signification, and then signification moves on to sign modeling with an eschatological target and its own mediating meaning that is applied to that target. And then through our positing and return, we will lift each of those returning signs into a greater universality, which will reach the true conceptual status of being a Noema, an entity of Noema, or structural universal identity, a universal Noema. And so it goes from thing to topoid to sign model to Noema through the process of differentiation and return. So it gives us a pretty good look at, like I said, it really is an overlay of the previous talk on epistemology, so it doesn't differ from the structure of Brentano's epistemology. It simply takes up a different framework and takes a look at the conditional parts of physical parts, logical parts, and metaphysical parts. And that takes us up through 220.